The rain pounded against the windows of Emily Carter's small apartment, each drop a reminder of the rejection letter sitting on her desk. 3 times now, the Westpoint Military Academy had denied her application. 3 times they'd told her she didn't have what it took. But Emily wasn't someone who accepted defeat, not when she knew in her heart she was meant for more. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emily stared at the letter, her fingers tracing the embossed letterhead that had become all too familiar. The words blurred before her eyes. Not from tears, she had cried her last tear over Westpoint during the second rejection, but from the intensity of her focus as a plan began to form. If they wouldn't let her in, she would build something better. Something that would make them regret ever overlooking her potential. The apartment was sparse, military neat, despite never having housed an official soldier. Her father's portrait hung on the wall, a decorated army colonel whose footsteps she had always dreamed of following. He had taught her that preparation was everything, that when the moment came, there would be no time to think, only time to act. Now those lessons would fuel something entirely new. Emily pulled out a notebook, its pages already filled with training regimens, tactical scenarios, and leadership exercises she had developed during her years of preparation. She had created these for herself, to be ready when Westpoint finally said yes. But now they would serve a different purpose. These would become the foundation of Apex Training Academy, her own program that would surpass the very institution that had rejected her. The rain continued to fall as Emily worked through the night, expanding her notes into a comprehensive curriculum. She didn't need their validation anymore. She needed only to prove to herself, and eventually to the world, that she had always been capable of greatness. By morning, as the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, Emily had mapped out the first 6 months of what would become the most rigorous civilian military training program in the country. She had no money, no facilities, and no staff. But she had something more valuable, an unwavering belief in herself and the quiet discipline to turn that belief into reality. Emily's first recruitment session took place in a public park. She had posted flyers across the local community college, offering free military-style fitness training for anyone interested in challenging themselves. She expected maybe 5 people to show up. 27 arrived, curious about the woman who stood ramrod straight at the entrance, clipboard in hand, stopwatch around her neck. "This isn't a fitness class," she told them, her voice carrying across the grass without shouting. "This is the beginning of something that will change your life, if you're willing to commit. I'm not interested in how strong you are today. I'm interested in how disciplined you'll be tomorrow and the day after that, and when no one is watching." 4 people left immediately. The remaining 23 stayed for the grueling 2-hour session that pushed them beyond what they thought possible. By the end, 7 more had dropped out. The 16 who remained lay exhausted on the grass, breath clouding in the morning air. Emily walked between them, her own breathing controlled, despite having completed every exercise alongside them. "You all did well today," she said, "but this was just the beginning. Those who want to continue, be back here tomorrow at 0500 hours. Bring water and determination. Everything else will be provided." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 9 people returned the next morning. 9 became the first unofficial class of what Emily still called in her mind Apex Training Academy, though she hadn't spoken the name aloud to anyone yet. For now, it was just training, a word that didn't capture the vision she held for what this could become. Among those 9 was Marcus Daniels, a former high school athlete whose college scholarship had fallen through, leaving him adrift and purposeless. There was Sofia Rodriguez, who had tried twice to enlist but had been turned away due to a minor medical condition that Emily knew wouldn't affect her performance. And there was James Chun, quiet and seemingly unremarkable, but with eyes that never wavered and a determination that Emily recognized immediately. For 3 weeks, they trained in the park, moving from location to location when park officials became too curious about their activities. Emily invested her savings in basic equipment, ropes, weights, and obstacle materials that could be quickly assembled and disassembled. She studied regulations carefully, operating just within the boundaries of what was permitted in public spaces. Word began to spread. By the 6th week, her group had grown to 23 regular participants. They no longer trained only in the mornings. Evening sessions had been added to accommodate those who worked during the day. Emily didn't sleep much anymore. When she wasn't training her recruits, she was developing new exercises, researching military protocols, or working her part-time job at the local security firm to fund her growing program. The real turning point came when Dante Williams, a retired Marine Corps sergeant who had been watching their training sessions from a distance, approached Emily after a particularly intense morning workout. "You're doing something special here," he said, extending a calloused hand. "But you need more space than a public park." Emily regarded him cautiously. She had learned to be wary of those who offered help. Too often they wanted to take control or dilute her vision. "I'm working on it," she replied, her voice neutral. Dante nodded, seeming to understand her hesitation. "I have a friend with 15 acres outside of town. Old farm that's been sitting empty for years. The barn's still solid. Might be a good place for what you're building here." 2 days later, Emily stood in a cavernous barn, its wooden beams soaring overhead. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that broke through the slats in the walls. The property around it was overgrown but flat, perfect for running courses. "And outdoor training. What's the catch?" she asked Dante, who had brought her here. "No catch," he said. "Owner's my brother-in-law. He's been trying to sell this place for 3 years with no takers. Says you can use it until he finds a buyer, as long as you maintain the property and keep an eye on things." Emily walked the perimeter of the barn, her mind already mapping out how the space could be transformed. "And what do you want from this arrangement?" she asked, turning back to Dante. He smiled, the creases around his eyes deepening. "I want to help train these kids. I've been watching you. You've got something most drill instructors I knew would envy, genuine leadership. But there are things I know that could help what you're building here." Emily considered his offer. She had been doing this alone for months now, carrying the weight of every decision, every plan, every failure and success. Having someone who understood military training would be invaluable. But could she trust him not to take over what she had built? "I started this because I have a vision for training that goes beyond what traditional military academies offer," she said carefully. "I need to know you understand that before we move forward." Dante nodded. "That's exactly why I want in. What you're doing here isn't just preparing people physically. You're building something more holistic. I've been in long enough to know when someone's got the right idea." That night, Emily didn't sleep at all. She sat at her small desk, drafting plans for what Apex Training Academy could become with a proper facility. By morning, she had created a comprehensive 6-month program that combined rigorous physical training with tactical education, leadership development, and psychological resilience building. When her trainees arrived at the park for their regular session, she instead loaded them into 3 cars and drove them to the farm. Their faces as they emerged into the morning light, taking in the expansive property and the towering barn, told her everything she needed to know. This was the beginning of something bigger than any of them had imagined. "Welcome to Apex Training Academy," Emily announced, using the name officially for the first time. "This is our new home. It's not much yet, but together, we're going to build it into something extraordinary." For the next month, training was split between physical conditioning and transforming the barn into a functional facility. Emily taught her recruits how to construct indoor obstacle courses using recycled materials. Dante brought in old friends from his military days who donated equipment they no longer needed: ropes, climbing walls, weight sets that had seen better days but were still serviceable. Word continued to spread. Applications began to arrive, first a trickle, then a steady stream. Emily developed a rigorous screening process. She wasn't interested in creating a typical boot camp that anyone with the fee could attend. She wanted candidates who showed potential that traditional institutions might overlook: the quiet strength, the unwavering determination, the willingness to prepare when no one was watching. 6 months after that rainy night when Emily had received her third rejection letter, Apex Training Academy held its first official class. 25 candidates had been selected from over 100 applicants. The program would run for 6 months, with participants living on site in simple accommodations that Emily and her original trainees had constructed in the outbuildings surrounding the barn. On the first morning, as the new recruits stood at attention in the pre-dawn light, Emily walked slowly down the line, studying each face. They were a diverse group, men and women ranging in age from 18 to 35, from various backgrounds and with different reasons for being there. Some had been rejected from military service for minor issues that Emily knew wouldn't affect their performance. Others were looking for purpose and discipline that they hadn't found elsewhere. "Each of you is here because I saw something in you that others might have missed," she began, her voice cutting through the morning air. "The kind of strength that doesn't announce itself, but simply acts when the moment demands it. Over the next 6 months, we will push you beyond what you believe possible. We will strip away every limitation you've placed on yourself. And when you leave here, you will carry with you not just physical capability, but the unshakable knowledge that you are capable of excellence in everything you do." As the sun rose over Apex Training Academy, Emily Carter stood before her first official class, no longer defined by rejection, but by the program she had built from nothing. The journey was just beginning, but already she knew that what was happening here would eventually eclipse the very institution that had told her she wasn't good enough. What none of them realized yet was that Emily had designed Apex to surpass traditional military training in key areas. While physical fitness and tactical knowledge formed the foundation, Emily's program emphasized adaptive thinking, ethical leadership, and psychological resilience in ways that conventional academies often overlooked. She incorporated the latest research on human performance, stress management, and team dynamics, creating a holistic approach that prepared graduates not just for military-style challenges, but for leadership in any environment. Each day at Apex began at 0430 hours. Physical training started in darkness and continued through sunrise. Running, climbing, strength work that pushed bodies to their limits. But unlike traditional programs that relied primarily on breaking people down through exhaustion and stress, Emily's approach was more nuanced. Physical challenges were paired with problem-solving exercises that required clear thinking even when exhausted. Team dynamics were constantly shuffled to ensure participants learned to adapt quickly to new situations and personalities. By the end of the first month, 3 recruits had left the program. Emily had expected more dropouts, but those who remained showed a level of commitment that sometimes took her breath away. They pushed through exhaustion, encouraged each other during moments of doubt, and embraced every new challenge with determination that grew stronger each day. One morning, as Emily watched her recruits complete a particularly demanding obstacle course she had designed, Dante approached her with a curious expression. "You've got visitors," he said, nodding toward the entrance to the property where 3 men in military dress uniforms stood observing the training. Emily felt her stomach tighten. She recognized one of them immediately, Colonel Richard Hayes, the head of admissions at Westpoint, the man whose signature had been on all 3 of her rejection letters. "Did you invite them?" she asked Dante, keeping her voice neutral. He shook his head. Word's getting around about what you're building here. Guess they wanted to see for themselves. Emily straightened her shoulders and walked toward the visitors, her pace measured, her expression composed. She would not show them the slightest hint of the anger or hurt their rejections had caused. Instead, she would show them exactly what they had missed. "Gentlemen," she said as she reached them, extending her hand, "welcome to Apex Training Academy. I'm Emily Carter, founder and head instructor." Colonel Hayes took her hand, his grip firm, his expression unreadable. "Miss Carter, I thought I recognized your name when reports of this facility crossed my desk. You've been busy since we last corresponded." Emily met his gaze steadily. "I prefer to think of it as productive, Colonel. Would you like a tour of our facilities and an overview of our training program?" For the next hour, Emily led the military officials through Apex, explaining her methodology, demonstrating exercises, and introducing them to several of her top recruits. She spoke with confidence, not as someone seeking approval, but as an equal, a fellow professional in the field of military training and leadership development. As they watched a complex team exercise that required both physical stamina and strategic thinking, Colonel Hayes turned to Emily with a thoughtful expression. "Your approach is unconventional," he said, "but I can't argue with the results I'm seeing. These recruits demonstrate impressive levels of both physical capability and adaptive thinking." "That's because we don't separate those elements in our training," Emily replied. "Traditional programs often treat physical conditioning, tactical knowledge, and leadership development as separate tracks. At Apex, we integrate them from day one." The visit concluded with an unexpected request. Colonel Hayes asked if Westpoint might send observers to study Emily's methods more closely, with an eye toward potentially incorporating some of her innovations into their own training programs. Emily agreed, maintaining her professional demeanor, until the military officials had departed. Only then, alone in her small office that had once been a tack room in the barn, did she allow herself a moment to absorb what had just happened. The same institution that had rejected her 3 times was now looking to her program for inspiration. It wasn't about vindication, she realized. It had never really been about proving Westpoint wrong. It had been about creating something that reflected her own vision of excellence, something that might eventually change how military training was approached altogether. As Apex Training Academy continued to evolve, its reputation grew beyond what Emily could have imagined on that rainy night when she had first conceived it. Within 2 years, graduates from her program were being actively recruited by elite military units, law enforcement agencies, and private security firms. The 6-month waiting list for admission grew to a year, then longer, forcing Emily to develop a second training facility to meet the demand. What set Apex apart, beyond its innovative training methods, was the community it created. Graduates remained connected, forming a network that supported each other professionally and personally. They returned to help train new classes, bringing real-world experience that enriched the program further. Emily had created not just a training academy but a movement, one that was redefining excellence in a field that had once told her she didn't belong. On the 3rd anniversary of Apex's founding, Emily stood before a gathering of graduates, current trainees, and instructors. The facility had grown almost beyond recognition. State-of-the-art training equipment now filled the barn that had once been empty save for dust and potential. The surrounding property had been transformed into training grounds that rivaled or surpassed those of official military installations. 3 years ago, I stood in this space with nothing but a vision and the unwavering belief that preparation meets opportunity, she began, her voice carrying across the crowd without need for amplification. Many of you know that before Apex, I received 3 rejection letters from Westpoint Academy. A murmur went through the crowd. Some knew this story, others were hearing it for the first time. Those rejections were painful, but necessary. Emily continued. They forced me to ask myself what I truly wanted to build. Did I want to fit into someone else's system, or did I want to create something better? The answer led to what we've all built together here. She gestured to the facilities around them, to the faces of those who had been part of the journey. Apex was never about creating an alternative to traditional military academies. It was about raising the standard, about showing what's possible. When we combine rigorous physical training with innovative approaches to leadership and psychological resilience. Emily paused, looking out at the gathering. Among them now were representatives from military academies around the country, including Westpoint, who had come to study Apex's methods. There were government officials who had begun incorporating elements of her training into various agencies. There were corporate leaders who had sent employees through modified versions of her, programmed to develop their leadership capabilities. What began as one person's response to rejection has become a movement that is changing how we think about training for excellence, she said. And that's because of each of you, those who believed in this vision when it was nothing but words and determination, those who pushed through the hardest days of training, those who took what you learned here and applied it in ways I never imagined. As the sun began to set over Apex Training Academy, casting long shadows across the grounds that had seen so much transformation, Emily felt a profound sense of gratitude. The path that had seemed so devastating when those rejection letters arrived had led her to create something far more impactful than she could have achieved by following the traditional route. 3 months after the anniversary celebration, Emily stood at the edge of the training grounds, watching her newest class navigate the advanced obstacle course that had become a signature element of Apex's program. The winter wind cut across the open field, carrying with it the shouts of encouragement as recruits helped each other over walls and through tunnels, designed to test not just physical strength, but teamwork under pressure. She felt a presence beside her and turned to find Marcus Daniels, one of her original 9 trainees, who now served as Apex's head of tactical training. He had transformed from the directionless young man she'd met in the park to a confident leader who commanded respect without raising his voice. The Richardson twins just broke the course record, he said, gesturing toward the 2 women who were helping their teammates complete the final challenge. Working together, of course. Individually, they're strong. Together, they're unstoppable. Emily nodded, a small smile playing at the corner of her mouth. Their application was almost rejected, you know. Their previous commander noted they were too interdependent to develop properly as individual leaders. And you saw something different, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I saw 2 people who understood that true strength comes from recognizing when to lead and when to support. Emily checked her watch. Time for the next phase. Let's see how they handle the communications breakdown scenario. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. As Emily and Marcus walked toward the command center, a repurposed farmhouse that now housed state-of-the-art simulation technology, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down, then stopped walking, her expression shifting to something Marcus couldn't quite read. Everything okay? He asked. Emily handed him the phone. On the screen was an email from the Department of Defense, requesting a meeting to discuss the potential implementation of Apex training methodologies across all branches of the military. This isn't just about observing anymore, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what this could mean. They want to integrate our approach into standard training protocols. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's exactly what you've been working toward, isn't it? Emily took back the phone, her mind already racing with possibilities and potential challenges. It's one thing to build something that works on our scale. It's another to translate it to an institution as massive and tradition-bound as the military. If anyone can do it, it's you, Marcus said with the quiet confidence that had become his trademark. You built this from nothing. You changed the game. Emily nodded, pocketing the phone. Let's focus on today's training first. The Dodd can wait until we're sure the Richardson twins and their team have mastered crisis communication. The communications breakdown scenario was Emily's own creation, a simulation, where team members were systematically cut off from each other, forcing them to rely on pre-established protocols and intuitive understanding of each other's decision-making processes. It tested not just how well they communicated, but how well they could function when communication was impossible. From the observation room, Emily watched as the team encountered each new challenge. The Richardson twins were immediately separated, placed on opposite sides of the simulation. Without their usual partnership, each would have to step into leadership roles with others who didn't share their nearly telepathic connection. Interesting choice, Dante remarked as he joined Emily and Marcus. Though now in his 60s, the former Marine moved with the same deliberate efficiency he had displayed when Emily first met him. Testing their individual capabilities? Testing their trust in their teammates, Emily corrected. They need to know they can rely on others the way they rely on each other. As the scenario unfolded, Emily made notes on her tablet, documenting moments of exceptional performance and areas that would need attention in tomorrow's debrief. Her approach to feedback was as methodical as everything else at Apex, specific, actionable, and always framed around growth rather than criticism. When the simulation concluded, Emily gathered the team for an initial assessment before the more detailed debrief that would come later. The recruits stood at attention, faces flushed from exertion, eyes alert despite the physical and mental demands they had just endured. You all faced significant challenges today, Emily began, her voice carrying the perfect balance of authority and respect that had become her hallmark. The purpose of the communications breakdown scenario isn't to see if you can win, it's to see how you respond when winning seems impossible. She walked slowly along the line, making eye contact with each recruit. Morgan and Taylor, she said, addressing the Richardson twins when separated. You both immediately established clear command structures within your new teams. That's exactly the adaptability we're looking for. The twins, identical down to the short haircuts they both sported, nodded in unison, the one habit they hadn't been able to break. Debrief at 06:00 tomorrow. Until then, recovery protocols and reflection time. Dismissed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the recruits filed out, Emily's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a different kind of notification, one that pulled her back to the beginning of her journey. The annual admissions results from Westpoint had been published, and among the names was Zoe Carter, Emily's younger sister, who had applied with Emily's reluctant blessing. A complex mix of emotions washed over Emily: pride for her sister's achievement, a twinge of the old hurt from her own rejections, and something else, a realization that the path that had once seemed the only way forward was now just one of many possible routes to excellence. Later that evening, after completing her administrative duties, Emily drove to the small cabin she had built on the far edge of the Apex property. It was her sanctuary, the one place where she allowed herself to step back from the constant demands of leadership. The cabin was simple, one main room with a small kitchen, a bedroom, and a porch that faced away from the training facilities, toward the mountains beyond. She poured herself a cup of tea and stepped onto the porch, watching as the last light faded from the sky. The Dodd email and Zoe's acceptance had stirred up memories of where this had all begun, not just with the rejection letters, but with the childhood moments that had shaped her understanding of discipline and purpose. Her father had been demanding but fair, instilling in Emily a sense that excellence was not about recognition, but about knowing you had given everything to a worthy pursuit. He had died before seeing her build Apex, but she felt his influence. in every aspect of what she had created. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Zoe, calling with excitement about her acceptance. "Did you see?" Zoe asked without preamble. "I got in." "I saw," Emily replied, genuine warmth in her voice. "Congratulations, Zoe. You earned it." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "It feels weird, you know. Being accepted to the place that turned you down. Part of me feels like I should decline, go to Apex instead." Emily shook her head, though her sister couldn't see it. "No, Westpoint is right for you. It always has been. You wanted it for the right reasons, not because you were following in anyone's footsteps. But after everything they put you through—" "They didn't put me through anything," Emily interrupted gently. "They made a decision based on the criteria they value. It led me to create something that aligns better with my vision of leadership training. Both paths have validity." The conversation continued, shifting to practical matters, what Zoe should expect, how to prepare, the traditions and challenges that awaited her. Emily found herself able to offer advice without resentment, to celebrate her sister's opportunity without diminishing her own accomplishments. When the call ended, Emily remained on the porch, thinking about the meeting with the Department of Defense that would take place next week. If things went as she hoped, elements of Apex's training methodology would soon be implemented across military branches. The institution that had rejected her would be adopting her innovations, not because she had forced her way in, but because she had built something too valuable to ignore. The next morning, Emily met with her leadership team, Marcus, Dante, Sophia Rodriguez, who now headed physical training, and James Chen, who had developed into Apex's most innovative tactical instructor. They gathered in the small conference room adjacent to the command center, mugs of coffee steaming before them as Emily outlined the opportunity presented by the duty's interest. "This isn't about validation," she emphasized, echoing the thought she'd had during her conversation with Zoe. "It's about impact. If our methods can improve training across the military, that means better prepared service members and potentially saved lives. They'll want to water it down," Dante warned, the caution born of decades in military bureaucracy evident in his tone. "Take the parts that fit easily into their existing framework and discard the rest." Emily nodded, acknowledging the concern. "That's why we need to be strategic about how we present our approach. We'll focus on elements that have measurable outcomes, the integrated physical tactical training modules, the adaptive leadership scenarios, the psychological resilience protocols." "What about the community aspect?" Sophia asked. "The way we build long-term connections between graduates, the ongoing support network." "That's harder to quantify, but it's crucial to what makes Apex work." "Exactly why we need to find ways to demonstrate its value," Emily replied. "James, can you pull together data on how our graduate network has contributed to continued professional development and mission success rates?" James nodded, already making notes on his tablet. "I've been tracking those metrics. The evidence is compelling." The meeting continued, each team member contributing insights and raising potential challenges. What struck Emily, as it often did during these sessions, was how far they had all come from their beginnings. Marcus, once directionless, now strategized with the precision of a career military officer. Sophia, rejected from traditional service, had developed physical training protocols that were being studied by elite units. James, whose quiet demeanor had initially masked his tactical brilliance, now spoke with the confidence of someone who knew his expertise was valued. They had all been overlooked in some way before finding their place at Apex, and now, collectively, they were poised to influence training methodologies across the entire military establishment. As the meeting concluded, Emily remained at the table, reviewing her notes and refining the presentation she would deliver to the DOD representatives. Dante lingered behind, his weathered face thoughtful. "You know," he said, settling back into his chair, "when I first saw you training those kids in the park, I thought you were just another well-intentioned civilian with romantic notions about military training." Emily looked up, a slight smile acknowledging his candor. "And now? Now I think you understand something fundamental that many career military folks miss. Training isn't just about creating soldiers who can follow orders and execute missions. It's about developing humans who can think critically, adapt constantly, and maintain their moral compass under the most extreme pressure." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "What you've built here, it's not just an alternative to traditional academies. It's the evolution they need but haven't fully recognized yet." Emily considered his words, touched by the assessment. From someone whose military experience she deeply respected. "That evolution won't happen overnight," she said. "And it won't happen without resistance." "The best changes never do," Dante replied with a shrug. "But they happen all the same when their time has come." The day of the DOD meeting arrived. With a clarity that seemed fitting, the sky washed clean by overnight rain, the mountains in the distance sharply defined against the horizon. Emily dressed with deliberate care, choosing the professional suit that acknowledged the formality of the occasion while maintaining the practical aesthetic that defined Apex's approach. The DOD representatives, 2 generals, a colonel, and a civilian consultant who specialized in training methodologies, arrived precisely on schedule. Emily met them at the main entrance to the property, where the Apex logo, a stylized mountain peak with 3 stars, above it, now marked the gateway to what had become a renowned training facility. "Welcome to Apex," she greeted them, her handshake firm, her gaze direct. "We've prepared a comprehensive tour followed by a demonstration of our integrated training approach." General Patricia Winters, the highest-ranking officer in the group, regarded Emily with keen interest. "Miss Carter, your reputation precedes you. I've read the reports from our observers. Impressive doesn't begin to cover what you've accomplished here." "Thank you, General," Emily replied. "But Apex isn't the work of any single person. Our team has collectively developed what you'll see today." The tour proceeded through training facilities that had evolved far beyond the empty barn and overgrown fields where Apex had begun. State-of-the-art obstacle courses designed to test both physical capability and decision-making under stress. Simulation rooms equipped with technology that could replicate virtually any operational environment. Classrooms where tactical theory was taught alongside practical application. Throughout, Emily explained not just what they were seeing but why each element had been developed, the philosophy behind the design, the outcomes it was intended to produce. "What makes Apex different?" she explained as they observed a team navigating a particularly challenging scenario, "is our integration of physical, tactical, psychological, and ethical training. We don't compartmentalize these elements. They're all essential aspects of the same whole." Colonel James Martinez, whose background was in special operations training, nodded thoughtfully. "I've noticed your recruits communicate differently than what I typically see. There's a shorthand, an efficiency that usually takes years to develop in the field. That's by design," Emily confirmed. "From day one, we place recruits in situations where clear communication under pressure is essential. They learn quickly that efficient communication can mean the difference between success and failure." The demonstration that followed showcased Apex's approach in action, a complex scenario involving multiple teams, changing conditions, and ethical dilemmas embedded within tactical challenges. The DOD representatives watched intently, occasionally, making notes or exchanging glances as particularly innovative elements unfolded. When it concluded, they gathered in the conference room for the formal presentation. Emily stood at the head of the table, her leadership team seated along one side, the DOD representatives on the other. "What you've seen today represents 3 years of development, testing, and refinement," Emily began. "But the core principles have remained consistent from the beginning: integration of all training elements, emphasis on adaptive thinking, cultivation of ethical leadership, and development of psychological resilience. She presented data showing the outcomes Apex had achieved, placement rates for graduates, performance metrics in their subsequent roles, feedback from organizations that had hired Apex-trained personnel. The numbers told a compelling story of success that transcended traditional measurements. "We're not proposing that the military abandon its established training methods," Emily clarified as she moved toward her conclusion. "We're suggesting that elements of our approach can enhance what already exists, particularly in areas where traditional training has struggled to adapt to evolving challenges." The discussion that followed was rigorous, probing, occasionally challenging. Exactly what Emily had prepared for. The generals and colonel asked pointed questions about scalability, consistency, and integration with existing protocols. The civilian consultant was particularly interested in the psychological resilience aspects of the program. Through it all, Emily and her team responded with the confidence of people who had built something from the ground up, who understood every aspect of its design and function. They acknowledged limitations honestly, proposed adaptations where necessary, and stood firm on elements they believed were non-negotiable. As the meeting drew to a close, General Winters leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful. "Miss Carter, when this meeting was first proposed, there were those who questioned whether a civilian-developed training program could offer meaningful insights to military institutions with centuries of tradition behind them." Emily maintained her composure, though she felt her team tense slightly beside her. "Having seen what you've built here," the general continued, "I'm convinced not only that it can, but that it must. The challenges facing our military personnel today require exactly the kind of integrated, adaptive approach you've pioneered." She leaned forward, her gaze direct. "We would like to establish a formal partnership between the Department of Defense and Apex Training Academy, with the goal of implementing key elements of your methodology across all service branches, beginning with selected special operations units." The magnitude of what was being offered took a moment to fully register. This wasn't just acknowledgement of Apex's value. It was an opportunity to transform military training at the highest level, to influence the development of future leaders across the entire defense establishment. "General Winters," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the emotions running beneath the surface, "we would be honored to partner with the DOD in this capacity. Our mission has always been to elevate the standard of training and leadership development. This partnership would allow us to extend that mission far beyond what we could achieve independently." As the meeting concluded and the DOD representatives prepared to depart, General Winters took a moment to speak privately with Emily. "There's something else you should know," she said, her voice lowered slightly. 3 years ago, I was on the review board that considered your final application to Westpoint." Emily felt a flicker of surprise, but kept her expression neutral. "I see. I voted to accept you," the general continued. "I was outvoted. Having seen what you've built here, I can now say that was the best thing that could have happened, not just for you, but for the future of military training." She extended her hand. Sometimes the most valuable innovations come from those who are forced to create their own path. Westpoint's loss has become the entire military's gain. As Emily watched the DOD vehicles depart, Marcus came to stand beside her, a question in his eyes. "They want to implement our methods across all branches," she told him, still processing the scope of what had just been offered. "Starting with special ops units," Marcus whistled softly. "From rejected applicant to reshaping military training. That's one hell of a journey, boss." Emily smiled, thinking of the rain-soaked night when she had stared at that final rejection letter and made the decision that had led to this moment. "The journey's just beginning," she said, "and we've got a lot of work ahead." That evening, as the day's events settled in her mind, Emily made a call to her sister. "How's Westpoint's newest cadet?" she asked when Zoe answered. "Nervous, excited, wondering if I'm really cut out for this," Zoe admitted. The usual pre-training jitters, I guess. You are, Emily assured her. And someday, you'll be training cadets using methods that started right here at Apex. There was a pause. What do you mean? Emily explained the partnership with the DoD, the plans to implement Apex methodologies across military training programs, including, eventually, the academies. So in a way, Zoe said slowly, you'll end up at Westpoint after all. Emily laughed. Softly, not exactly, but something I created will. Something better than I could have built if they'd accepted me. As they talked, Emily gazed out over the Apex grounds, now quiet as evening fell. From her window, she could see the lights of the barracks where the current class of recruits were preparing for tomorrow's challenges. Beyond that, the outline of the barn where it had all begun, now transformed into Apex's main training facility, but still recognizable as the empty space full of potential that Dante had shown her 3 years ago. The rejection that had once seemed like the end of a dream had instead been the beginning of something far more significant. Not just a personal achievement or a vindication of her capabilities, but a genuine contribution to how leadership would be developed for generations to come. What had started with one woman's unwavering belief in herself had grown into a movement that would shape the future of military training, not by forcing entry into established institutions, but by building something so valuable they would come seeking partnership. It was a testament to the power of perseverance, innovation, and the quiet determination to excel even when no one is watching. 1 year into the DoD partnership, Emily stood on the newly constructed observation deck overlooking Apex's expanded training grounds. What had once been a single overgrown farm had grown into a 200-acre compound with multiple specialized training zones, research facilities, and residential areas for both short and long-term programs. The original barn still stood at the center, preserved as a reminder of Apex's humble beginnings, despite offers to replace it with something more modern. "Penny for your thoughts," came a voice from behind her. Emily turned to find Dr. Leela Harrington, the neuropsychologist who had joined Apex's leadership team 6 months ago to head their groundbreaking resilience training program. "Just taking it all in," Emily replied, gesturing toward the expanse before them. "Sometimes I still see the empty fields and wonder how we got here." Layla joined her at the railing, her analytical gaze sweeping across the training grounds, where 3 different cohorts were simultaneously engaged in various exercises. By recognizing something others missed, that excellence isn't just about physical capability or tactical knowledge. It's about integration of mind, body, ethics, and community. Emily nodded, watching as a team navigated the advanced decision-making course she had designed specifically for the DoD partnership. The course required participants to make rapid tactical choices while processing conflicting information and managing physical stress, a simulation of the increasingly complex environments military personnel faced in modern conflicts. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "The Joint Chiefs visit next week," Emily said, changing the subject. "General Winters says they're particularly interested in the early results from the Special Operations implementation. The data is compelling," Leela confirmed. "Units that have integrated our methodologies are showing significant improvements in mission success rates, team cohesion metrics, and, perhaps most importantly, post-deployment psychological adjustment." Emily had insisted from the beginning that any evaluation of Apex's impact include not just operational effectiveness, but the long-term well-being of the personnel involved. It was an aspect of military training that had historically received insufficient attention, the human cost behind the mission statistics. "We've prepared the full presentation, but I think the live demonstration will be more impactful," Emily decided. "Let's show them Alpha Team's response to the fractured communication scenario." It highlights everything we've been working toward. Alpha Team had been the first special operations unit to fully implement Apex's integrated training approach. Their performance had become something of a legend among military observers, not just for their tactical excellence, but for their unprecedented adaptability in rapidly changing situations. As Emily and Layla descended from the observation deck, they passed through the main academic building where classroom sessions were underway. Through one doorway, Emily glimpsed Dante leading a discussion on ethical decision-making under extreme pressure, a course that had become one of Apex's most influential contributions to military training reform. The conventional wisdom, Dante was saying to a room full of attentive faces, is that high-stress situations force us to fall back on our most basic training. But what we've demonstrated here in Apex is that with the right preparation, stress can actually enhance ethical clarity rather than diminish it. Emily smiled slightly, remembering the skepticism that had greeted this particular aspect of Apex's approach when first presented to military leadership. Now it was being studied by ethics departments at major universities and implemented across special operations training programs. In the adjacent classroom, James Chun was conducting a session on adaptive tactical thinking, another Apex innovation that had transformed traditional approaches to combat training. Were conventional programs often emphasized mastery of established protocols. Apex taught personnel to develop new solutions in real time when existing playbooks failed. Incoming, Layla murmured, nodding toward the main entrance where a familiar figure in dress uniform was making her way through security protocols. Zoe Carter, now Second Lieutenant Carter, stood taller in her uniform than Emily remembered. The year at Westpoint had changed her, added a confidence and precision to her movements that reminded Emily of their father. Surprise inspection? Emily asked with a smile as she approached her sister. Zoe returned the smile, though protocol prevented the hug they both wanted to share in this professional setting. More like an unofficial liaison visit. My commanding officer thought it might be instructive for me to observe the Apex methodologies firsthand, given the integration plans for the Academy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Instructive for you or intelligence gathering for Westpoint? Emily asked with a knowing look. Both, Zoe admitted. The integration team is particularly interested in your psychological resilience protocols. They're unlike anything currently in the Academy curriculum. Emily introduced Zoe to Leela, and the three women made their way toward the research wing where the resilience program had been developed. As they walked, Emily noticed how personnel, both Apex staff and visiting military, acknowledged Zoe with respect while still deferring to Emily's authority. It was a subtle dance of military hierarchy and Apex's more fluid leadership structure. The resilience program began with a simple question, Layla explained as they entered her department. Why do some individuals thrive under pressure while others of equal capability and training falter? The traditional military answer has been character or mental toughness, qualities assumed to be either innate or developed through suffering. They passed through laboratories where researchers monitored physiological responses to various stressors, classrooms where techniques for cognitive regulation were being taught, and meditation spaces designed for specific neurological outcomes, rather than spiritual practices. What we've discovered, Layla continued, is that resilience is neither innate nor forged solely through hardship. It's a set of specific cognitive and emotional skills that can be systematically developed, much like physical or tactical capabilities. Zoe absorbed the information with the intensity Emily recognized from their childhood, the same focus she had applied to dismantling and reassembling their father's service pistol when she was 12, determined to understand its every component. This contradicts centuries of military tradition, Zoe observed. The belief that breaking people down is necessary to build them up. Exactly, Emily confirmed. And that's been the most significant barrier to implementation, not the practical aspects, but the philosophical shift required. Fortunately, results speak louder than tradition. The results were indeed speaking. Early data from units that had implemented Apex's resilience protocols showed not just improved performance under stress, but significant reductions in post-traumatic stress disorders, substance abuse issues, and suicide rates, the invisible casualties of military service that had long been accepted as inevitable collateral damage. As their tour concluded, Emily led Zoe to her office, a space that reflected Apex's philosophy in its design. Glass walls provided transparency and connection to the activities beyond, while selective privacy features could be activated when confidentiality was required. The furniture was functional but comfortable, arranged to facilitate conversation rather than emphasize hierarchical differences. "You've created something remarkable here," Zoe said once they were seated. "Something that's changing how the entire military thinks about training and leadership." Emily smiled at her sister's assessment. "That was never the goal, you know. I just wanted to build something that made sense to me, training that integrated all the elements I believed were essential." "That's why it works," Zoe replied. "You weren't trying to reform an existing system from within its own constraints. You built something new based on first principles." The conversation shifted to the upcoming visit from the Joint Chiefs and the broader implementation plans for Apex methodologies across military branches. Zoe shared insights from Westpoint's perspective, the enthusiasm among younger instructors, the resistance from traditionalists, the cautious interest from leadership who couldn't argue with the performance data. "There's something else," Zoe said finally, her expression growing more serious. "Something not in my official capacity." Emily raised an eyebrow, waiting. "Colonel Hayes is retiring next month. He's requested a meeting with you before he leaves." Colonel Hayes, the man whose signature had appeared on all 3 of Emily's Westpoint rejection letters. The man who had later visited Apex in its early days and initiated the first official observations of her training methods. "Did he say why?" Emily asked, keeping her tone neutral. Zoe shook her head. "Just that it was important to him personally before he concludes his service." Emily considered the request, surprised to find that the name no longer evoked the complex emotions it once had. Hayes had become just another figure in the journey that had led to Apex, not an adversary or gatekeeper, but simply someone who had made decisions based on the criteria he valued at the time. "Tell him I'd be happy to meet," she said. "He can come to Apex, or I can make time during my next visit to Washington." The next morning, Emily led her leadership team through final preparations for the Joint Chiefs visit. The demonstration schedule had been refined, the data presentations polished, and contingency plans established for every variable they could anticipate. "Remember," she told the assembled team, "this isn't about impressing them with perfect execution. It's about demonstrating the adaptability and integration that makes our approach different. If challenges arise during the demonstrations, they become opportunities to showcase our methods in real time." Marcus, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the meeting, lingered behind as others dispersed to their assignments. His usual confidence seemed tempered by something Emily couldn't immediately identify. "Everything all right?" she asked once they were alone. He hesitated, then squared his shoulders in the way she had come to recognize as his preparation for delivering difficult news. "I've been approached by General Winters about a position heading the new Joint Special Operations Training Initiative. They want someone who understands both traditional military structure and Apex methodologies to lead the integration efforts." Emily felt a momentary pang at the thought of losing her head of tactical training, but it was quickly replaced by pride. Marcus had come to her as a directionless young man seeking purpose. Now he was being recruited for a position that would influence special operations training across all military branches. "You should take it," she said without hesitation. No one is better qualified to ensure the integration stays true to what makes our approach effective. Relief flooded his features. I was worried you'd see it as abandoning Apex. Apex was never meant to be an endpoint, Emily replied. It's a beginning, a model for what's possible when we rethink traditional approaches. Having our people move into positions where they can expand that influence is exactly what we should be working toward. She smiled, remembering the small group that had trained in the park in those early days. Besides, you've been here since before we even had a name. You've earned the right to carry what we've built into new territory. The conversation shifted to practical matters. Who might step into Marcus's role? How to ensure continuity? During the transition, ways to maintain the connection between Apex and Marcus's new position. Throughout, Emily felt a deepening appreciation for how far they had all come, not just in terms of professional accomplishment, but in personal growth and purpose. When Marcus left to continue preparations for the Joint Chiefs visit, Emily took a moment alone in her office. On the wall hung a simple framed document, her third and final rejection letter from Westpoint. She had placed it there not as a reminder of failure or even as motivation, but as acknowledgement of the unexpected paths that lead to one's true purpose. Beside it now hung newer documents, the formal partnership agreement with the Department of Defense, citations from military leaders acknowledging Apex's contributions, academic papers analyzing the effectiveness of their integrated training approach. Together, they told a story not of revenge or vindication, but of transformation, of how rejection had led to innovation that was now reshaping the very institution that had once deemed her unsuitable. The Joint Chiefs visit unfolded with military precision over 2 days of demonstrations, briefings, and strategic discussions. Emily and her team showcased not just Apex's current methodologies, but the ongoing research and development that kept their approach at the cutting edge of training science. What impressed the military leadership most wasn't the sophisticated facilities or the impressive performance metrics, but the culture Emily had created, one where continuous improvement was expected, where questioning established methods was encouraged, and where the human element of military training was never subordinated to operational outcomes. Miss Carter, Admiral Jackson said during the final briefing, what you've built here represents the kind of innovation our military has traditionally struggled to generate internally. The question now isn't whether to implement your methodologies, but how to do so while preserving the essence of what makes them effective. The concern was valid. Emily had seen how revolutionary approaches could be diluted when absorbed into large bureaucratic structures. The transformative elements filed down to fit existing frameworks until what remained was merely a shadow of the original innovation. That's why we're proposing the Joint Training Integration Council, Emily replied. A body composed of both Apex personnel and military leadership, with the authority to oversee implementation and ensure fidelity to core principles while allowing for necessary adaptations to specific service requirements. The proposal was met with thoughtful consideration. By the end of the visit, a framework had been established for the most comprehensive reform of military training in decades, one that would touch every service branch and potentially reshape how the next generation of military leaders would be developed. As the high-ranking officials departed, Emily found a moment of quiet reflection on the observation deck where she had stood with Layla just days before. The scope of what was unfolding still seemed surreal at times, that what had begun as one person's alternative path had grown into something with the potential to transform institutions centuries old. Emily Carter, came a voice she hadn't heard in many years. She turned to find Colonel Richard Hayes standing at the entrance to the deck, his uniform immaculate, his posture as precise as it had been when he had signed those rejection letters that had altered the course of her life. Colonel Hayes, she acknowledged, extending her hand. Zoe mentioned you wanted to meet before your retirement. He shook her hand firmly, then moved to stand beside her at the railing. For a moment, he simply observed the training grounds below, where teams continued their exercises despite the departure of the high-ranking visitors. "I've been watching the development of Apex since my first visit 3 years ago," he said finally. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable, not just the training methodologies themselves, but the philosophy behind them." Emily waited, sensing there was more to this visit than professional acknowledgement. "I came today to tell you something I should have said during that first visit," Hayes continued, turning to face her directly. "I was wrong about you." The admission hung in the air between them, simple, direct, and unexpected from a man whose military career had spanned nearly 4 decades. "The criteria we use to evaluate Westpoint candidates were designed to identify those who would succeed within our existing framework," he explained. "What they failed to measure, what I failed to recognize, was the potential for someone to create an entirely new framework that might be superior to what we had built over centuries." Emily considered her response carefully, aware of the humility this admission required from someone of Hayes' position and generation. "The rejections served their purpose," she said finally. "They forced me to question whether I wanted to fit into an existing system or create something that reflected my own understanding of what effective training should be." Hayes nodded, a slight smile softening his usually stern features. "That's precisely why I wanted to speak with you before retiring. In my 4 decades of service, I've come to believe that our greatest failure in military leadership has been our resistance to fundamental innovation, our tendency to mistake tradition for effectiveness." He gestured toward the training grounds below. "What you've built here isn't just a better mousetrap. It's a reimagining of what military training can and should accomplish, not just creating effective warriors, but developing complete leaders who can navigate the complexities of modern conflict without losing their humanity in the process." The conversation that followed was unlike any Emily had imagined having with the man who had once deemed her unsuitable for military leadership training. Hayes spoke of his own journey through the ranks, the limitations he had recognized in traditional approaches but had felt powerless to address from within the system, and his hope that the partnership between Apex and the military would preserve the innovative spirit that had made Apex successful. "My last official act before retirement will be to recommend the establishment of a permanent Apex-inspired training division within each service branch," he told her. "Not just implementation of specific methodologies, but creation of spaces where innovation in training can continue to evolve." As Hayes prepared to leave, he paused at the entrance to the deck. "You know, Miss Carter, in rejecting your applications, I inadvertently did you the greatest service possible. I freed you from the constraints that might have limited what you could create." Emily smiled. "I've come to the same conclusion, Colonel. Sometimes rejection is just redirection to a better path." After Hayes departed, Emily remained on the observation deck, watching as the day's training activities concluded and the evening shift began. Apex never truly slept. Different programs ran around the clock, mirroring the constant readiness required in real-world operations. Her phone buzzed with a message from Zoe. "Heard Hayes visited. How did it go?" Emily typed back. "Better than expected. I'll tell you over dinner tomorrow." As she slipped the phone back into her pocket, Emily's gaze fell on the original barn. At the center of the compound, preserved as a reminder of Apex's humble beginnings. In the fading light, she could almost see the empty space it had been, filled with nothing but dust and potential. 5 years had passed since she had stood in her small apartment, staring at that final rejection letter and making the decision that would lead her here. 5 years of building, refining, expanding, and now transforming not just her own path, but potentially the future of military training itself. What had begun as a response to rejection had evolved into something far greater than personal vindication. Apex had become a movement, a philosophy, a new paradigm for developing human potential under the most demanding conditions imaginable. As Emily made her way back to her office to complete the day's final tasks, she passed groups of trainees engaged in evening study sessions, instructors reviewing the day's performance metrics, and researchers analyzing data from the latest resilience protocols. Each person represented a thread in the tapestry Apex had become, a community united not by uniform or rank, but by shared commitment to excellence and continuous growth. In her office, Emily found a small package on her desk with a note from Marcus. "Found this while clearing out my old files. Thought you might want it." Inside was a weathered stopwatch, the same one she had used during those early days in the park, timing herself and her first recruits as they pushed through exercises that had seemed ambitious then but would be considered basic now. Emily held the stopwatch, feeling its weight in her palm. It had been a simple tool, but it represented something fundamental about her approach, the belief that preparation was measurable, that excellence required consistent practice, that readiness wasn't about waiting for permission, but about being prepared when opportunity appeared. She placed the stopwatch on her desk, beside the modern equipment that had long since replaced it. The contrast between them mirrored Apex's journey, from improvised beginnings to sophisticated implementation, but with the same core principles guiding every evolution. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the formal establishment of the Joint Training Integration Council, the selection of Apex personnel to serve as liaisons with each military branch, the continued research and development that kept their approach at the forefront of training science. But tonight, Emily allowed herself a moment to appreciate the path that had led here, not a straight line of advancement, but a winding journey shaped by both rejection and opportunity, by closed doors and unexpected openings. The most valuable lesson of Apex wasn't just about training methodologies or leadership development. It was about recognizing that sometimes what seems like failure is actually an invitation to create something better than what you originally sought. That rejection can be the beginning of innovation rather than the end of ambition. As Emily completed her final tasks for the day, she thought about the thousands of individuals who had now experienced Apex training, from her original 9 recruits in the park to elite military units, from law enforcement agencies to corporate leadership teams. Each carried a piece of what had been built here into their own spheres of influence, creating ripples of change that extended far beyond what she could directly observe. That, perhaps, was the true measure of what she had created, not the impressive facilities or the partnership with the DOD, or the academic recognition, but the transformed individuals who would continue to embody and extend Apex's principles long after they left its grounds. It wasn't about building an empire or achieving validation or even changing military training, though all those things had happened along the way. It was about creating something authentic and valuable, something that reflected her deepest understanding of excellence and gave others the opportunity to discover their own capacity for greatness. As she left her office and walked through the quieting compound toward her cabin, Emily passed a group of new recruits gathered around an instructor, their faces intent as they absorbed the day's final lessons. She caught fragments of the conversation. Something about preparation meeting opportunity, about excellence not announcing itself, but simply performing when the moment arrives. Emily smiled to herself, hearing echoes of the principles that had guided her from the beginning. The words might evolve, the methodologies might advance, but the core truth remained constant. True strength doesn't need permission to act. It simply prepares diligently, then steps forward when the time comes, ready to transform rejection into something far more powerful than mere acceptance could ever be. 10 years after founding Apex, Emily Carter stood on a stage at the Pentagon, facing an audience of military leaders, government officials, and educators gathered for the National Summit on Leadership Development. Behind her, a simple slide displayed the Apex logo alongside the insignias of all 5 military branches, a visual representation of the full integration that had been achieved over the past decade. When we speak of transformation in military training, Emily began, her voice carrying easily through the hushed auditorium, we often focus on technological advances, the new simulation systems, the advanced weaponry, the enhanced communication tools. But the most profound transformation isn't about technology at all. It's about how we develop the human beings who use that technology. The audience, people who collectively shaped how the next generation of leaders would be trained, listened with the focused attention that Emily had come to expect when discussing Apex methodologies. What had once been considered revolutionary was now recognized as essential. A decade ago, I stood in an empty barn with a stopwatch and a vision for training that integrated physical capability, tactical knowledge, ethical decision-making, and psychological resilience. Today, that approach has been implemented across every branch of our military and adopted by leadership programs in over 40 countries. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Emily paused, scanning the faces before her. In the front row sat Zoe, now a major and the youngest ever head of leadership development at Westpoint. Beside her was Marcus, who had transformed the Joint Special Operations Training Initiative into a model program that military leaders from around the world came to study. Further back, she spotted Dante, retired from active teaching but still serving as an advisor to Apex's ethics program. The success of this transformation wasn't due to any single insight or innovation, Emily continued. It came from asking a fundamental question. What if we approach training not as a process of molding people to fit existing systems, but as a way to develop their fullest potential so they could create better systems? As Emily elaborated on this philosophy, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The initial rejection letters that had once seemed so devastating had faded into historical footnotes, artifacts of a path not taken that had ultimately led to something far more impactful than she could have imagined. After concluding her keynote address, Emily navigated through a sea of handshakes and congratulations to reach a quiet anteroom, where she had arranged to meet with a special visitor. Waiting for her was Adira Martinez, a young woman whose story had particular resonance with Emily's own journey. "Ms. Carter," Adira greeted her, extending a hand that bore the calluses of someone accustomed to physical training. "Thank you for making time for me." "Please, call me Emily," she replied, gesturing toward the seating area. "And I've been looking forward to this conversation since General Matthews told me about your situation." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Adira Martinez had applied to all 3 military academies and been rejected by each. Despite exemplary academic records and physical capabilities, the reasons cited had been vague: fit concerns and leadership profile inconsistencies, language that Emily recognized as code for someone who didn't conform to traditional expectations. "Your application to Apex's Advanced Leadership Program was outstanding," Emily said once they were seated. "But before we discuss that, I'd like to hear more about your journey to this point." Adira straightened almost imperceptibly, a habitual response to attention that spoke of self-discipline cultivated long before any formal training. "After the 3rd rejection, I was ready to give up on a military career entirely," she admitted. "Then I read about your story, how you turned rejection into the foundation for something new." Emily nodded, remembering the profile that Military Leadership Quarterly had published the previous year, chronicling Apex's development and impact. "And that changed your perspective?" "It made me question whether the traditional path was actually the right one for me," Adira replied. "Maybe. Like you, I could contribute more by taking a different approach." The conversation that followed revealed a young woman of exceptional clarity and purpose, someone who had used rejection not as an endpoint, but as an opportunity to reassess and refine her goals. She had established a small training program in her community, focusing on leadership development for at-risk youth, achieving remarkable results with minimal resources. What you've built demonstrates exactly the kind of innovative thinking we value at Apex, Emily told her as their meeting concluded. The Advanced Leadership Program would be fortunate to have you, not because you need us to succeed, because your perspective will strengthen what we're building. As Adira left with an official acceptance letter, Emily was struck by the cyclical nature of transformation, how her own experience of rejection and redirection was now creating opportunities for others to find their authentic paths. It wasn't just about individual success stories. It was about creating systems that recognized and nurtured potential in all its diverse forms. The remainder of the summit was filled with strategic discussions, partnership announcements, and planning sessions for the next phase of Apex's evolution. As the military's primary training partner, Apex had grown far beyond its original scope, with specialized facilities now operating in 3 countries and consulting teams working with allied forces worldwide. Yet despite this expansion, Emily had maintained the core principles that had guided Apex from its earliest days: integration of all training elements, emphasis on ethical leadership, development of psychological resilience, and recognition. That excellence requires both individual discipline and community support. On the final evening of the summit, a reception was held at the Officers' Club, an elegant affair where military dress uniforms mingled with civilian formal wear. Emily, in a simple but impeccably tailored suit, found herself approached by a tall woman whose bearing immediately identified her as someone accustomed to command. "Miss Carter," the woman said, extending her hand. "General Diana Foster, newly appointed Joint Chiefs Vice Chair. I've been hoping to speak with you privately." Emily recognized the name. Foster had been a rising star in military leadership, circles known for her strategic brilliance and commitment to modernizing military culture. "It's an honor, General. How can I help?" Foster guided Emily toward a quieter corner of the room. "I've been tasked with leading the Military Transformation Initiative, a comprehensive review of how we prepare for the challenges of the next 2 decades. Your work with Apex represents exactly the kind of forward thinking we need to incorporate." The General outlined her vision, not just incremental improvements to existing systems, but a fundamental rethinking of military training, leadership development, and organizational structure. It was ambitious, potentially controversial, and exactly the kind of challenge that aligned with Apex's mission. "We're establishing a high-level advisory council to guide the initiative," Foster continued. "I'd like you to serve as one of its key members, bringing Apex's perspective and methodology to the table." The invitation represented more than professional recognition. It was an acknowledgement that the principles Emily had developed outside traditional military structures were now considered essential to the future of those very institutions. The outsider had become not just accepted, but sought after for guidance on the most fundamental questions facing military leadership. "I'd be honored to contribute," Emily replied. "Though I should warn you, my perspective often challenges conventional wisdom." Foster smiled, a flash of determination in her eyes. "That's precisely why I want you on the council. Conventional wisdom won't prepare us for unconventional challenges." Later that evening, as the reception wound down, Emily found herself standing with Zoe near one of the large windows overlooking the Potomac River. The sisters, now both leaders in their respective domains, had developed a relationship that balanced personal connection with professional respect. "I overheard your conversation with General Foster," Zoe said, her voice low. "The Military Transformation Initiative is going to ruffle a lot of feathers. Some of the old guard at Westpoint are already nervous about what it might mean." Emily considered this, watching the lights reflect on the dark water below. Change always creates resistance. But the military has always evolved when necessary, when circumstances demanded new approaches. True, Zoe acknowledged. But this isn't about incremental adaptation. Foster is talking about reimagining fundamental aspects of how we develop military leaders. And she's putting you, someone who built an alternative to the traditional system, at the center of that process. The irony wasn't lost on Emily. The institutions that had once rejected her were now seeking her guidance on how they should transform themselves. But there was no sense of vindication in this realization, only an awareness of responsibility and opportunity. The point was never to replace traditional academies, Emily said after a moment. It was to create something that filled gaps they weren't addressing. Now we have the chance to bring those elements together, to create a system that draws from the best of both approaches. The following morning, as Emily prepared to return to Apex's main campus, she received a message from an unexpected source. Admiral William Chun, father of James Chun, who had been among her original 9 trainees, requested a brief meeting before her departure. Admiral Chun had been a somewhat distant figure in the early days of Apex, supportive of his son's participation, but skeptical of what Emily was building. Over the years, as James rose to become Apex's Director of International Programs, the Admiral's perspective had gradually shifted. They met in a small conference room at the Pentagon, where the Admiral waited with a folder on the table before him. "Miss Carter," he greeted her formally, though his expression was warmer than in their previous encounters. "Thank you for making time before your departure." "Of course, Admiral. James sends his regards. He's currently overseeing the launch of our partnership with the Singapore Defense Forces." Shun nodded, pride briefly visible in his eyes before his professional demeanor returned. "I've asked to meet with you regarding a matter of historical significance, something I believe you should have." He opened the folder and removed a document official-looking, with faded letterhead and a date from 11 years earlier. "This is the minutes from the final review committee that considered your 3rd application to Westpoint. I was a member of that committee, though we never met directly." Emily took the document with a sense of surreal curiosity. The rejection that had altered her life's trajectory was now just a historical artifact, interesting, but no longer emotionally charged. "There were 14 members on the committee," Chun continued. "The vote on your application was 7-7, a perfect split. As chair, I cast the deciding vote." Emily looked up from the document, meeting his gaze. "You voted against my admission." Chun nodded, his expression solemn. "I did. And for years, I believed it was the correct decision based on the criteria we were using. You didn't fit the profile we had established for West Point cadets." He gestured toward the document in her hands. "What I didn't realize then, what none of us understood, was that our criteria were too narrow. We were selecting for replication rather than innovation, for conformity to existing models rather than potential to create new ones." The Admiral leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on a reflective quality. "I've spent 4 decades in military leadership, Miss Carter. I've seen training methodologies come and go. But what you've built with Apex, what my son has helped develop, represents the most significant advancement in how we prepare leaders that I've witnessed in my entire career." Emily absorbed his words, touched by the humility they represented from someone of his rank and experience. "Thank you, Admiral, but Apex wasn't built by me alone. It's been shaped by everyone who contributed their insights and commitment, including James, who brought perspectives I couldn't have provided." Chun smiled slightly at the mention of his son. "James told me once that Apex succeeded because you created a system that valued people for their potential rather than their pedigree. That you saw possibilities in him that traditional evaluations missed." He gestured toward the document again. "I wanted you to have this as a reminder of how profound your impact has been." My no vote, intended to maintain standards, instead launched a transformation that has ultimately elevated those standards beyond what we could have imagined. As Emily departed the Pentagon an hour later, the document safely tucked into her briefcase, she reflected on the conversation with Admiral Chun. There was a symmetry to it, a closing of a circle that had begun with rejection and culminated in a recognition far more meaningful than mere acceptance would have been. The car taking her to the airport, past the imposing buildings of Washington, symbols of institutional power and tradition. Yet within those very institutions, the methodologies and philosophies developed at Apex were now reshaping how leadership was understood and cultivated. Emily's phone buzzed with a message from Layla. Results from the longitudinal resilience study are in. Breakthrough findings. Can't wait to show you when you're back. Another message followed from Marcus. Joint Special Operations Teams implementing the Integrated Ethical Leadership Module, reporting unprecedented mission success rates and post-deployment adjustment metrics. We're changing the game, boss. And finally, a message from Adira Martinez. Thank you for today. You've shown me that rejection can be the beginning of something greater than acceptance ever could be. Ready to build what's next. Each message represented a thread in the tapestry that Apex had become. Research advancing understanding of human potential. Practical implementation demonstrating the effectiveness of integrated approaches. And new leaders emerging to carry the vision forward in ways Emily herself might never have imagined. As the car turned onto the highway toward the airport, Emily opened her laptop to review the draft proposal for Apex's next evolution. A global leadership institute that would extend beyond military applications to address challenges in governance, education, healthcare, and environmental stewardship. The core principles remained the same, but their application continued to expand as new needs and opportunities emerged. The proposal had been developed not by Emily alone, but by a team representing diverse perspectives and expertise. Some who had been with Apex since its earliest days, others who had joined more recently, bringing fresh insights and challenging established assumptions. This collaborative approach had become fundamental to how Apex operated, a recognition that the best solutions emerged from the integration of multiple viewpoints, just as the best training integrated multiple dimensions of human development. Looking back across the decades since she had received that final rejection letter, Emily could trace a path that no strategic plan could have mapped, a journey shaped by both determination and serendipity, by closed doors and unexpected openings. What had begun as a personal response to rejection had evolved into a movement that was transforming how human potential was understood and developed across multiple domains. The military academies that had once deemed her unsuitable were now implementing her methodologies. The leaders who had questioned her approach were now seeking her guidance. The system that had excluded her was now being redesigned with her at the table. But more meaningful than any institutional validation were the individual transformations, the thousands of graduates who had discovered capabilities within themselves that traditional training might never have revealed, who had gone on to lead with both effectiveness and humanity in contexts ranging from combat zones to corporate boardrooms. As the Washington Monument receded in the distance, Emily closed her laptop and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The journey wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The work of transforming how we develop human potential was never complete, only evolving to meet new challenges and incorporate new insights. What mattered wasn't arrival at some predetermined destination, but continuing to move forward with purpose and authenticity, to build something meaningful that served others, to transform rejection into opportunity, to create paths where none had existed before. Emily Carter had never become a Westpoint cadet as she had once dreamed. Instead, she had become something far more impactful, a catalyst for transformation in how leadership was understood and developed, a mentor to those navigating their own unexpected paths, an architect of systems that recognized and nurtured potential in all its diverse forms. As the plane lifted off, carrying her back to the campus that had grown from an empty barn to a global center for leadership development. Emily thought about Adira Martinez and countless others like her, individuals whose gifts might once have been overlooked but who now had opportunities to contribute in ways uniquely their own. That, perhaps, was the most enduring legacy of what had begun with those rejection letters. Not just a training academy or a methodology or even a philosophy, but a fundamental shift in how potential was recognized and developed. A recognition that excellence doesn't always announce itself in expected forms, that the most valuable contributions often come from those who see differently, and that rejection can sometimes be the beginning of a journey far more meaningful than the path initially sought. The transformation that had begun with one woman's refusal to let rejection define her limits had rippled outward, touching institutions and individuals in ways that continued to expand with each passing year. And while Emily Carter's name was now associated with innovation and leadership development across multiple fields, her greatest satisfaction came not from recognition, but from knowing that others would continue to build upon what she had started, creating new paths, challenging old assumptions, and transforming rejection into opportunity for generations to come. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.